The day Serena came back to the office after signing her divorce papers, she walked straight past reception, past the open floor, and knocked on my office door. She never knocked on my door. People like her didn't knock on doors like mine. I looked up from a deck I had been staring at without seeing for 20 minutes, and she was standing in the frame in her coat, still buttoned, bag still on her shoulder, like she'd walked in off the street and hadn't fully decided whether to stay. She set a paper coffee cup down in front of my keyboard, from the place on 5th she knew I liked, not the lobby cart, and stood there. "I just signed the papers," she said. I looked at her. "How do you feel?" She thought about it for 2 seconds, a real 2 seconds, not a polished pause. "Like I've been holding my breath for 3 years, she said, "and I just remembered I knew how to swim." She picked up her bag and walked toward her office. At the door she paused without turning around. "Cancel my 4 o'clock, I need to think, not perform." Then she was gone, and I sat there with a coffee I hadn't asked for and a sentence I was going to spend the next several weeks trying to unhear. Her name was Serena Harlow, and she had started the firm, Harlow Brand Strategy, 9 years before I arrived. I had been hired as a mid-level content strategist, which at Harlow meant I wrote things, shaped things, and occasionally fixed things that senior people had built slightly wrong and didn't want to admit. Within the first month, I had reorganized the entire editorial workflow in a way that apparently nobody had thought to do before. And one morning she walked to my desk with the expression of someone who had found a loose floorboard they'd been stepping around for years and was genuinely surprised someone had nailed it down. "Who told you to do this?" she asked. "Nobody," I said. "It was making me insane." She looked at me for a moment. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I spent the rest of the afternoon convinced I'd be gone by Friday. That was 4 years ago. What happened instead was harder to describe without making it sound like something other than what it actually was. She started pulling me into rooms I hadn't been invited to before, strategy meetings, pitch prep, the quiet conversations in her office with the door closed and 2 chairs angled close, the kind where you're not being managed, you're being consulted. I was good at my job, clearly, but there were other people at Harlow who were equally good and hadn't been asked into those rooms. I noticed that, even when I wasn't naming it. What I was specifically good at was the thing beneath the thing. The client who said they wanted a rebrand but actually needed someone to tell them their product was already worth believing in. The presentation that needed 10 words removed, not 10 more slides added. Serena moved fast, which meant she sometimes moved past the nuance. I didn't, and for 4 years that had been our unspoken arrangement. She covered the ground, I read the terrain. I knew her coffee order shifted from iced to hot in October, regardless of the weather forecast. I knew she reviewed her own decks 3 times before any pitch, and the 3rd review always happened the night before, always turned up something small, and the small thing always mattered. I knew the particular set of her shoulders when she walked into a room where she felt underprepared versus one where she felt ready. And the difference was about 4 degrees of angle that nobody else in the building seemed to notice. I had told myself for 4 years that this was professional attentiveness, that I was good at reading the room I worked in. I was not, in fact, simply being professionally attentive. There was a conference in Denver, 2 years before the divorce, almost to the month. I know the exact moment I stopped being honest with myself, because I remember the bar stool and the temperature of the beer I wasn't drinking and the exact quality of the light coming through the hotel lobby windows at 9 in the evening. The panel had run long and our dinner reservation had quietly expired, and we had ended up at the hotel bar talking, not about work, which was already unusual, about where we came from. She described the small town in Ohio she'd grown up in with a specific kind of complicated affection, the way people talk about a childhood they loved and are relieved to have left. I told her about my grandmother's house in Michigan, the floorboards that creaked in a pattern I still remembered. 1, 2, pause 3. Like the house was trying to tell you something. She laughed. Not the smooth, calibrated version she deployed in client meetings. The real one, the kind that arrived without announcement and took her whole face along for the ride. My grandmother's house had a door that only closed if you lifted the handle while you pushed, she said. I never told anyone the trick. I liked that I knew something the house was keeping. I remember thinking, I want to keep things with you. I didn't say that. I ordered another beer I didn't drink. She eventually checked her phone and said she should sleep, and we walked to the elevator, and the moment closed quietly behind us the way moments do when nobody opens them. But I knew what I had thought, and I couldn't unknow it after that. The divorce from Holden Drake had been 2 years coming by the time it actually arrived. He was a real estate developer, older than her by 9 years, the kind of man who treated building a marriage the way he treated building a portfolio: calculated acquisition, expected appreciation, low tolerance for depreciation. He had never been subtle about his low opinion of what he called the creative industry. At a company event once, I overheard him describe Harlow brand strategy as Serena's passion project, the way people say passion project when they mean hobby. She had smiled at him from across the room like she hadn't heard. She had heard everything. I didn't know the shape of the marriage from inside. I only knew what I could observe from the edges. The Monday mornings she came in carrying a quiet that wasn't peace. The way her voice dropped when she took personal calls in the hallway. Not private low, but careful low. The way you speak when you're managing what gets heard. The fact that she had been staying later for the past year. Not because the work required it, because something else didn't. The divorce finalized on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning I had quietly rescheduled her week. 3 fewer external meetings, 2 internal presentations rerouted to people who could run them without her. I hadn't said anything about it. That afternoon she texted me 2 words: "You noticed." I wrote back, "I always do." She didn't respond. I didn't read into the silence. What came 11 days later I had not seen coming, which is the thing about Holden Drake that I should have understood before I had occasion to understand it. He did not lose with grace. He lost with preparation. The first move was a message from an unknown number. A photograph, taken through plate glass from outside the building, of me and Serena, sitting across from each other at my desk during a pitch prep session the previous week. The angle made the ordinary look intimate. That's the thing about photography when it's being used as a weapon. Framing does all the work, and the subject has no say in what the frame chooses. Below the image, careful about optics, Kieran. Some things look different from the outside. I stared at it long enough to understand exactly what it was and what it meant. Then I forwarded it to my own email, screenshotted it, and walked to Serena's office. She was very still when I showed her. The kind of still I had learned over 4 years was not actually stillness at all. "He's been watching," she said, more to herself than to me. "Looks like it." She placed her phone face down on the desk. "He's going to use this." "For what?" "To build a story he's been building for a while." She said it evenly, which meant the weight behind it was enormous. That the reason I was never fully present in that marriage, the reason it failed, the reason I put everything into this company, was something inappropriate happening inside it. Something he could point to. She looked at me directly. "He's going to try to take my professional credibility, and he's going to route it through you." I said, "What's our next move?" She almost smiled, a small tired version of it. "I'm still calculating." "Calculate faster," I said. "He chose the timing. We don't have to let him choose the pace." 3 days later, HR called me in. The complaint had been filed through a third-party attorney, not Holden's name anywhere on the letterhead, which was careful and deliberate and told me exactly how much thought had gone into this. The allegation was that I had engaged in a prolonged, inappropriate personal relationship with Ms. Harlow that constituted a conflict of professional interest and a pattern of preferential treatment. There was the photograph. There was also an email, one I had never written, fabricated with sufficient surface plausibility that it would require forensic comparison to disprove. I read it twice, which was long enough to feel the specific nausea of seeing your own name attached to words you would never say in a style you would never use. "The board has requested a formal review," said Lorraine, the HR director, a composed woman in her late 50s who delivered difficult things with the practiced gentleness of someone who had done this enough times to have developed a private philosophy about it. "In the interim, you're being asked to work remotely and limit direct contact with Ms. Harlow." I nodded. I kept my face neutral and my hands under the table. Walking out of that building with my laptop bag and 4 years of work carried somewhere in my chest that I wasn't sure I still had full rights to. That was the part I hadn't been prepared for. Not the injustice exactly. You know injustice exists. It's the specific, precise sensation of watching something you spent years building get picked up and used as a weapon against the person you built it beside. Serena called before I reached the parking structure. "I know," she said before I could speak. Kieran, this is on me and I want you to know." "It's not on you. He used you to punish me." "Serena." I kept my voice low. I was not internally low in any sense of the word. Don't walk into that building today and do something fast. That's what he's built the whole thing for. He wants you reactive. He wants a confrontation he can document. You are smarter than this move. You have always been smarter than the move directly in front of you. A long pause, then quietly, how are you calmer than I am right now? I'm in a parking garage, I said, having what I believe qualifies as a crisis. I just arranged the crisis into sentences so it fits in my mouth. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. Don't disappear on me, she said. Not a chance, I said, and I meant it in every direction the words could go. I spent 4 days at my kitchen table doing what I always did, managing what I could manage from a distance, keeping Harlow's editorial engine running because disrupting it would only land on people who had nothing to do with any of this. On the 5th evening my phone rang. Serena. He held a press event, she said, and her voice had the flat, careful quality of someone who has absorbed a hit and hasn't yet decided where to put the pain. I stood up from the table. Tell me all of it. He called it a private statement to business press. He said, and I'm quoting, that the breakdown of our marriage was the result of a culture I had concerns about for years at Harlow Brand Strategy. He implied, without saying directly because he's careful, that there was an ongoing personal relationship between me and a member of my team. He described himself as the wronged party who had tried quietly to protect the integrity of a company he had emotional investment in. A pause. Kieran, the email, the photograph, the press contacts. He wasn't building this after the divorce. He was building it during. The whole time we were in mediation, he was setting this up. He wasn't angry, he was organizing. I walked to the window. The street below was doing what streets do, continuing without consultation. Where are you right now? I asked. Home. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. That detail, Serena Harlow, who moved through boardrooms like weather and ran a 40-person firm on the strength of her forward momentum, sitting still for 2 hours, hit me somewhere below the ribs. I'm coming over, I said. You're under a remote work. I'm aware of where I am, I said. I'm coming anyway. She lived in a brownstone on a quiet block, the kind of building that looked like it had formed opinions over time. She opened the door in a gray sweater that had been washed too many times to care about it anymore, hair loose, no trace of the version of herself she carried into conference rooms. She looked at me for a moment, and I looked at her, and then she stepped back to let me in. We sat on her couch. There was a mug of tea she had made at some point and not touched. She told me about the years inside the marriage. Not as a confession exactly, more like a debrief. The way she had learned to edit herself in his presence, to pitch her own ideas more quietly so he wouldn't feel displaced, to take calls in the other room so he wouldn't have to hear her being competent at something, to laugh less, to celebrate less, to need less visibly. The worst part, she said, looking at the cold tea, is that I convinced myself it was compromise, that every relationship required this kind of adjustment. She shook her head slowly. It wasn't adjustment, it was subtraction. He kept asking me to subtract things until there was less of me to compete with. He was afraid of what you were, I said. I know. She said it quietly, not with anger, just with the particular exhaustion of knowing something a long time without being able to act on it. I knew it while I was still in it. I just thought understanding it was the same as solving it. She turned and looked at me, the way she had in Denver in the bar 2 years ago, with the lamplight and the untouched beer, open and unguarded and entirely present. You never made me feel like that, she said. In 4 years, not once. Do you understand how rare that is? I didn't answer. The answer was too large for the room. She reached over and set her hand on top of mine where it rested on the cushion between us. I turned my hand over and held hers. We sat like that for a long time. The city outside did its city things. The tea stayed cold. There was nothing to resolve, and we weren't trying to resolve anything. We were just two people sitting in the specific relief of no longer pretending something wasn't happening. The board session was called for Monday morning at 9. I was not supposed to be there. The remote work directive was still technically in force, and walking into Harlow would constitute a clear violation of my review terms. I had read the terms. I understood them with complete clarity. I was in the building by 8:50. The floor had the specific tension of a morning when everyone knows something is happening on a higher floor, and nobody is talking about it directly. I got 4 visible double takes crossing the open office. The elevator took me to 12 without asking any questions. The conference room was glass-walled and already full. 7 board members, Holden's attorney at the far end with a presentation queued and waiting, and Serena at the head of the table in a blazer the color of deep water, hands folded, posture composed in the structural way, the load-bearing way. She looked formidable. She always looked formidable. But her fingers were pressed flat against each other in a way I had learned to read over 4 years, and I read it now. She saw me when the door opened. Her eyes found mine and held there, and something moved across her face that I had enough experience to translate, relief and alarm arriving simultaneously, relief edging ahead. Holden's attorney turned and smiled the way people smile when they believe they've just been handed something additional. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I think this may have just made our position considerably clearer." I walked to the front of the room and stood beside Serena's chair, not behind it, beside it. "My name is Kieran Shaw," I said, addressing the board directly. "I'm a senior content strategist at Harlow Brand Strategy, and I am currently in violation of the remote work directive imposed during my review. I want to acknowledge that clearly, and I accept whatever professional consequence that carries." I looked at each face at the table without rushing. But before this board makes a permanent decision based on fabricated evidence submitted by a man who spent years trying to contain this company, and is now furious that he can't, I think you deserve to hear from someone who was actually present for the work. The room was completely quiet. I placed a USB drive on the conference table, 4 years of documented professional communication between Ms. Harlow and myself, every brief, every revision thread, every project record. The email presented by opposing counsel does not match my writing syntax, my formatting, or any pattern in 4 years of actual correspondence. A comparison will establish that in under 10 minutes. I met the eyes of the board chair, Dr. Patricia Shen, who had the expression of someone who had already formed a private conclusion and was waiting for the record to confirm it. You'll also find, in that record, evidence of what this company actually is and who built it. Holden's attorney started to speak. Dr. Shen raised one hand and he stopped. She looked at the drive, she looked at me, she looked at Serena. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, "anything to add?" Serena stood. She was quiet for a moment, which with Serena meant the quiet was doing work. "I built this company from a single consulting contract into a firm that now employs 41 people, she said. "I did that by being careful about who I trusted with the things that mattered. The person standing next to me is the reason 3 of our most significant client relationships survived difficult years." She looked around the table without hurrying. "He has not once in 4 years done anything that compromised this firm's integrity. What has compromised it is a deliberate, premeditated campaign by a man who is angry that I am no longer willing to be smaller for his comfort." A pause. "I won't minimize what happened in my marriage, but I will not allow it to be used to erase what we built here." The board deliberated for 38 minutes. Holden's attorney walked out of the building without speaking to anyone. Dr. Shen found me in the corridor afterward and told me the complaint had been dismissed entirely, that the fabricated email was being referred to relevant legal authorities, and that the board appreciated my candor regarding the review violation, which they had agreed to treat as context rather than cause. I said thank you and meant it for about 6 different things at once. Serena came out a few minutes later. The conference room behind her was emptying, board members collecting their things, the whole careful structure of Holden's plan dismantled and leaving nothing useful behind. She walked toward me and stopped. "You were supposed to stay home," she said. "I know. You put your standing here at risk, your record." "I'm aware." "Kieran." She said my name the way she had said it in Denver, slowly, like she was choosing to. "You were worth the risk," I said simply, because it was simply true. Her eyes filled, not spilling over, just full, the way eyes get when something large has been moving toward them for a long time and has finally arrived. She stepped forward and put her arms around me, and I held her the way I had wanted to hold her for 2 years, while convincing myself that keeping the distance was professionalism and not fear. We stood there in the corridor with the city light coming through the glass walls around us, and it felt like what it was. 2 people on the other side of something that had tried very hard to end them, and hadn't. "I kept choosing the wrong things, Kieran," she said quietly, her voice against my shoulder. I pulled back just enough to look at her. "You're choosing now," I said. "That's the part that belongs to you." She looked at me for a long, still moment, and then she smiled. The real one, the Denver one, the one that arrived without announcement and took everything with it. That was 10 months ago. Holden Drake's manufactured evidence became its own legal matter in the months that followed. His attorneys settled the exposure quietly and efficiently, the way people settle things when the alternative is a public record they can't control. He has not contacted Serena since. I think in the end it was the only decision he made during the entire episode that demonstrated any real intelligence. The Harlow board quietly updated several internal policies after the case closed. Lorraine from HR told me, with no editorial comment, that she found the new framework significantly easier to work with. As for me, about 6 months ago, Serena and I were at a small Italian restaurant, the kind with paper tablecloths and candles in old wine bottles, the kind she would never have picked for a client dinner, and she looked across the table and said, "I think it's time you stopped working for me." I set down my fork. "That sounds like a firing." "It's not," she said, and the expression on her face was the open, unhurried one from Denver and the couch and the corridor. "It's an observation. You've been holding things together for me for 4 years. You're good enough to build something of your own." She tilted her head slightly. "Also, this has gotten complicated to explain to Lorraine." I said, "I can't think of anything I'd want to build that doesn't have you in it somewhere." She held my eyes for a moment. Then she reached across the paper tablecloth and covered my hand with hers, the same way she had that night when the tea went cold and the city went on without us. "Then we figure out the rest together," she said. Same word, our word. Neither of us had ever voted on it, but there it was, the one that had been waiting in the room long before either of us said it out loud. If any part of this stayed with you, if you've ever kept yourself at a careful professional distance from something real and told yourself the distance was the right thing, leave a comment below. Tell me about it. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to Mercy Stories. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because the best stories I know aren't the ones that end with a grand gesture in a crowded room. They're the ones that end with a hand on a paper tablecloth and 2 people who finally stopped pretending they were only one thing to each other.